Hello, everybody out there in podcast land. My name's Paul Thomas, and we are the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. Joining us today is Judy Donegan. Say hello, Judy.
Hello.
Michelle Church.
Hello.
Thaddeus Paul Hamus.
How do you do?
And Mike Bernard.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Today's topic is the 2020 election, which is ongoing now. But I want to start the discussion by taking a look back at the 2016 election. Donald Trump lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by more than 3 million votes, but he won enough states. But evidence uncovered by the Mueller investigation, as well as the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee, indicated that the Trump campaign received foreign assistance from Russia in that 2016 election. Given what we know now from news reports and the Mueller and Senate intelligence investigations, do you consider Trump's 2016 victory legally legitimate? We go first to our legal expert, Judy Donegan. Judy, is that a legitimate victory that Trump had in 2016 in your mind?
Well, I guess when you say legally legitimate, you mean it more than just people don't quite believe it was right. So there should be some legal basis for thinking that there's some illegitimacy, and foreign interference in an election is illegal. But then you have to sort of ask the question, do we have to know whether it was outcome determinative or likely to have a determinative effect on the outcome of the election? And I don't know we can tell that. I don't know how you ever tell that. So I guess I don't know if it would be legally illegitimate. I think a bigger issue is what do you do about it if it is? So that would be my question. I think we have lots of gaps in our statutes and in the Constitution that aren't filled and are becoming obvious by the current situation we are finding ourselves in.
Thaddeus, what's your take on the legality of Trump's victory in 2016?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I am not really very versed in all of this. And considering what Judy just said, I am not sure. But I think that if we were to continue to investigate this, it may be possible that actual breach of law would be found. So I think if we knew everything that there is to be known, we would probably find that this is not legally legitimate victory.
Michelle, what's your take?
I would have to agree that we don't know everything, but certainly the circumstantial evidence seems to point towards, nefarious actions. That if we knew what everything there was to know, that I don't think it would be legitimate. But given what actually was presented to the public, you'd have to say that it was legally legitimate.
Okay. Mike, what's your take?
I feel similarly to Michelle in that it probably checked all the boxes, as in, okay, did it do this thing? Did it do this? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, it's legal, but all the nuances underneath that the general public and non-lawyers would not understand, there probably is a lot of room for nefarious or inappropriate activity that could push the election one way or another. So it probably was legally legitimate, but if you apply other adjectives to the word legitimate, that's a whole nother conversation.
We were looking for legal. Okay. FBI Director Wray testified to Congress that Putin is again trying to interfere in the 2020 election to help Trump win. is the effort by Putin worthy of consideration that he is a significant factor regarding the outcome of this election? Or should no weight be given to Putin's influence regarding who wins this time? Is Putin a player in the 2020 election? We'll go ahead with you, Mike. What do you think?
I would say probably, but not the only. I've heard news stories, I think I also read in The Economist magazine, where different parties want different candidates to win. So I've read that Putin wants Trump to win. I've read that China actually would like Biden to win because they think they'll be softer on China. He'll be softer on China than Trump would be. Other players may want other outcomes. So Putin alone being the
But the
one.
question, Mike, the question is, do you think Putin wanting Trump to win and his efforts to help Trump to win will be a significant factor in the election?
I would say probably not, to be honest.
Okay, good. Thad, what's your take?
Well, I am going to be qualified about saying I don't think that it's going to have a major effect. I have a feeling that I may be wrong about this, that not because of anything that we've heard about what Putin has done, but what we have heard about what Mitch McConnell has not done. And that was appropriate funds to investigate Russian interference. And he has basically put a stopper on our taking any action to investigate what Putin might be doing. So we don't know. And we don't know because of something that Americans in Washington have chosen not to do.
Okay, so you feel that Putin may be trying, but he may not have that major effect that he maybe had in 2016. Michelle, what's your thoughts?
I agree. You don't need me on this panel. I mean, I think Putin is definitely a player, but I think that there are so many pieces that are interconnected that if he was the only issue, then maybe not. But I think he's able to shuffle the board enough that he will have influence. So, I mean, I guess, he's a player. I don't know if he's the tipping point player.
Judy, Putin a player?
Well, I suppose he probably is. I don't know why he wouldn't be. And as far as what influence he might have, I think we could only hope that because we know what happened last time, that there would be a lot more Americans watching out for disinformation campaigns and that kind of thing. I don't know if we are. I don't know if people can recognize it. I don't know if I can recognize it. But you would hope that we were a little more educated about what might be happening than we were last time.
My biggest fear regarding hacking this time around, whether it is foreign power or seditious Americans, is not the voting machines, which are not connected to the internet, but the voter registration databases, which are connected to the internet. Are there enough safeguards to these databases to keep any meddling statistically insignificant? The databases, are they safe? Judy?
I don't know. And I don't really know anything about it. I think they thought last time that the Russians did not get into those databases, except in possibly a couple states where they tried. But I'm sorry, I just don't have enough information to know if there's.
Anybody, Thaddeus, do you have any feelings on that?
Feelings, but not a whole lot more information. What we have gotten from public statements on various newscasters has been reassuring, and it's been reassuring from pretty much all sides. So I feel fairly confident that our government has got that one covered. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly confident that that part of it is going to be okay.
It's the state and local controls that you're referring to, not
Yeah.
the feds.
Yeah.
What do you think about, Mike? You think you're more of a computer guy? You think it's safe?
I think so. For the very reason that it's state and local control. Of course, a lot of it depends on how good the antiviral and protections are in each local database, but I think enough has been said in the news and just in general American conversation that this is an important issue, so I think it's going to be in good shape.
Michelle, last word on this issue.
Well, I would be way more worried about seditious Americans, because they are involved in the local and state. So that kind of manipulation in the databases, I think there's been enough distrust about the whole process that's been thrown around over the last few years that everything is questionable in my mind.
Questionable, but you think they can make a difference?
I think so, but I think that the power and maybe the problem lies in the fact that the voters have to play an active role in making sure that their names are on those databases ahead of time, and not wait until election day and then, so because there's been enough warning out there that people should be checking on this stuff themselves. So there is a level of personal responsibility on the backs of the voters that needs to be taken into consideration.
Well, I agree with all of you. I think there's been enough concern about it that they're not really going to, anybody that might mess with the databases won't get in there to affect enough votes, or registrations, I should say. Okay, voter suppression is increasingly becoming a major issue in today's politics. The most egregious example that I know is a system called CrossCheck, developed by former Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, where voter registration lists were sent from state to state to see if any names were duplicated. So if one Paul Thomas was registered to vote in Alaska and another Paul Thomas was registered in Pennsylvania, a state could cancel his registration by claiming he was trying to vote in both places. Surprisingly, most of the cross-check deletions were registrations of Democrats of color. Thankfully, the ACLU aggressively litigated cross-check into oblivion so that particular attempt at voter suppression is no longer a threat to our democracy. What examples of voter suppression have you observed that you would like to share, and how much are you concerned of the effect it may have on this election? Let's start with you, Michelle. Have you observed any voter suppression that you're worried about?
I don't know that I have personally observed any, but I certainly believe that the voter rolls can be cleared nefariously, again, by folks that have control over those databases that have a partisan bent. I do think that voter suppression is going on. Certainly, I mean, just the example of, the state of Texas allowing one drop box per county when there's millions of people that would need to do that is certainly a very clear and pretty egregious example. So it certainly is out there.
Judy, have you been concerned about any voter suppression that you've heard in the news or seen yourself?
I've actually seen something kind of firsthand. It kind of involves how slowly intelligent people were to recognize some things that were voter suppression, not attempts at preventing voter fraud. In 2006, we'll go back a ways, Indiana enacted the first photo ID law in the country. and that was challenged in the Seventh Circuit. The decision upheld the law. That's Crawford v. Marion County, and it's still good law. But the decision upheld the law, but there was a dissent, I'm proud to say, by the guy I worked for, where he pointed out that those laws were intended to disenfranchise the poor and the Black people who may not have state-sanctioned IDs, and certainly probably not passports. That was appealed to the Supreme Court, and Justice Stevens, writing for the court, upheld it. But the interesting thing to me was that several years later, Posner, who had written the Seventh Circuit decision, in one of his many books, said he was wrong, that case was wrong, and that the dissent was right, and that the Indiana law was intended as voter suppression. And then in 2016, Justice Stevens was on a panel discussing the case, and he called it a fairly unfortunate decision. He didn't say he would have decided it differently because he didn't think there was an adequate record. But it was interesting to me that those both really brilliant men didn't seem to understand what was going on back in the mid-2000s.
So was this a 6-3 decision, or?
It was 6-3 in the Supreme Court, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And Souter had a strong dissent. But the trouble is that we have voter ID laws all over the country because that case still stands, even though a number of the people involved along the way have recognized that maybe they were wrong. I just find that interesting. I don't know.
That'll dovetail into our next question. But first, we want to get that and Mike. Mike, have you observed anything, or are you concerned about any voter suppression from your view?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised when I was listening to the question that the suppression was targeting a specific population. A form of what I consider voter suppression is the gerrymandering that has been going on in the last decade and even earlier, where some states the gerrymandered maps were thrown out, and others were allowed to stay. And I consider that another form of voter suppression, even if it isn't direct, because it gives some people in some districts disincentive to vote because, heck, hey, there's only 80% of the people are the other party. Why should I care? I'll never win, that type of thing.
That?
Well, one example of voter suppression that concerned me a lot was the June primaries in the state of Georgia, where apparently the Secretary of State pretty much unilaterally disenfranchised about 75,000 people, mostly people of color or poor people. And at the same time, that Secretary of State was a candidate for governor who won. That was basically, it looks like they allowed it to stand that a candidate for office would be in charge of the election.
When you say they allowed it to stand, who are you referring to? Who was the authority there?
That would be the election board for the state of Georgia. But they allowed themselves to be led on the board by someone who is actually running for office in that election that he was in charge of running. So
the authority was Kemp himself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he basically got to pick his own voters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, voting by mail has become controversial. and this goes back to what Judy was saying about the voter ID thing, because voting by mail, you can't have an ID if you're voting by mail. No one's there to check it if you send your ballot in. Trump doesn't seem to know which side of the issue he wants to stand, because many Republican voters also like the convenience of voting early by mail. The latest disturbing suggestion he made to supporters in North Carolina was to vote twice, first by mail and then again on election day at the polls. How is voting by mail working in your estimation? And are you concerned that this method can lead to fraudulent ballots being counted? Thaddeus, start us off on the voting by mail discussion.
Okay, I think that the very beginning of your question, voting by mail has become controversial because Donald J. Trump wants it to be controversial. That's an open and shut case. The idea that people are going to defraud by voting by mail is something that has happened so rarely in the last 165 years that it's been practiced in this country, that a claim that this was going to be fraudulent before anybody had filled out a ballot at all is simply, I think, the cry of a candidate who thinks he's going to lose and wants to litigate about it afterwards. That's it.
Judy, you were talking about the need for an ID starting out of Indiana. Voting by mail, you can't even have an ID that anybody's going to check, because you're putting your ballot in the mail. So what do you think about that in regard to the Supreme Court decision and that you cited, or just voting by mail generally?
I think that's kind of ironic, isn't it? That, that's a good point, Paul. And I hadn't really thought much about it. I guess I wouldn't be worried about voting by mail. It seems to work in Oregon. It seems to work in a lot of places. What worries me is how we're kind of, and the media particularly, is kind of legitimizing Trump's goal here, as Thaddeus described it, by constantly talking about how he's talking about how illegitimate it will be. So it's sort of an echo chamber, and I'm afraid that he's probably going to succeed in convincing a lot of people that voting by mail is not safe.
Michelle, you have any thoughts on voting by mail?
Well, I just did. So
As did I. I
Yeah.
did too.
Me too.
yeah, so I agree. Trump is just laying this out there because he thinks he's going to lose. Now, if he wins, voting by mail will be a beautiful thing. And so I mean it's such clear, giant crayon capital letter writing that he deals with, and yet we still stumble over it, because I don't think there's ever been anybody who was willing to be this openly ridiculous and egregious on our institutions in a way that just benefits him. And it's clear that's what he's doing. But for some reason, the Republican Party's not stepping up and saying, well, actually, I take that back. They kind of are.
A few Republicans.
Yeah. I mean, it's beginning to be a little bit more, because I think people are starting to kind of step away a little bit from the Trump train. But I think voting by mail is fine. There is an ID component to it. You have to put in your voter number, your birth date, which I suppose, somebody could hack your information and vote for you. But it certainly has been used. Absentee ballots have been used very successfully by the Republican Party in Alaska. And, that's voting by mail. So
Yeah, sure is. Mike, any concerns about voting by mail? Everybody seems to think that Trump's the one that's making it controversial. What do you think?
Yeah. No question. I think it's going fine. We're unanimous in this panel right here. All of us have voted by mail, or in our cases, we delivered our mailed ballots to a box. And so I think it's going to be more than fine. It's just yet another pattern of Trump's bloviating about whatever he wants to bloviate about that's not serving him.
He does like to bloviate. Within the Vote Twice message, the president is encouraging his supporters to go to the polls in order to stop the Democrats from cheating in the election. God only knows what they could see that would indicate anyone standing in line to vote is in the process of committing voter fraud. So what is Trump really hoping for when he tells his supporters to go to the polls to stop the Democrats from cheating? Mike, what do you think the president is hoping to achieve by throwing that out?
I'm looking at the question. I mean, what's coming to mind is if he's saying to people, go to the polls and be poll watchers, is probably the attempts for voter intimidation. And so, and of course, since we're not for him, well, when Democrats are not for him, we're automatically the bad people. And so no matter what we do, we're doing bad things in his mind. And so,
so you don't think he'll be able to identify, or these people will be able to identify any cheating going on? It's just to show up and intimidate.
Yeah, I think so. Because, I mean, on the cheating end, I mean, what? It's like 0.00004% of all ballots cast in the last whatever years was considered fraudulent, which I think came out to like 13 ballots in a billion or something like that. So yeah, I really don't think it's that. It's like you say, oh, the Democrats are cheating, so go get them. And it's like, yeah, it's intimidation all the way.
Michelle, intimidation, or is there something else going on?
No, it's total intimidation. And if the poll watch or the poll workers run the polls the way they're supposed to, those folks that are not trained and already signed up as poll watchers won't be allowed anywhere near where the people are voting. So there is nothing to watch. It's pure intimidation.
I think it's 200 feet in most places where you have to be, separated from the entrance to the polls, whatever. Mm-hmm. Judy, all intimidation, like Michelle and Mike think?
I think it's all intimidation. And I don't think he's just calling for poll watchers. I mean, poll watchers are almost legitimate things. But I expect what he's calling for are people rather threatening, perhaps outside that 200-foot boundary. And I've heard in past elections in other states where the fear is that having more or less, law enforcement people as at the polls is designed to reduce people who might be afraid to go to the polls because they don't want to encounter law enforcement people, or people who are immigrants and don't want their status questioned. I mean, legal voters, but who don't want their status questioned. So I think it's pure intimidation.
Dad, last word on the topic. Intimidation, cheating, what's going on?
Well, we're pretty unanimous on the intimidation, but I want to throw in just a little touch of dementia here, because it doesn't make any sense at all. And we know this guy says some pretty crazy stuff, and this is right there at the top of the list of crazy stuff that he said.
There have been zero commitments from Trump that he will respect the results of the election. If Biden does win the electoral and popular vote, what do you think Trump will do, Thaddeus?
He already said it. He said, stand back and stand by. I think that he will first try to litigate, and if litigation doesn't work for him, he is going to send thugs out in the street.
Okay. Michelle?
I think he's going to send thugs out in the street while he litigates.
Judy?
Yeah, the thugs will be in the streets, I think. He's such a coward. I mean, he might just slink off and send the thugs out into the street. I don't know. It's a scary proposition, and I think the military is worried that they're somehow going to get involved in having to solve this thing, and they don't want to be there.
Well, I think that there's also the idea of local police forces dealing with thugs on the street. And those police forces are under the control of the mayors of the cities, not necessarily police chief, but the police chief has to answer to the mayor. And if the mayors of the cities want to deal with those thugs in whatever ways they choose, then that's how that's going to play out. Mike, what's your take on what Trump will do?
Yeah, litigation for sure wherever possible. Even if it's clear that he's lost and there's no hope of him winning, he'll just do it to irritate. I think he will go down screaming, kicking, yelling, creating all kinds of issues and problems all the way up till January 20th at 11:59 and 59 seconds. I think it's just going to be so, he's going to be nasty. My hope is that the people will rally around and say, enough, shut the you-know-what up. That's the hope.
With the frantic activity to get a new Supreme Court nominee confirmed before the election, the super spreader ceremony took place at the White House where bunches of officials and staffers, including Trump, ended up with COVID-19. Then we were subjected to the spectacle of the flights to Walter Reed, the ride in the SUV waving to supporters, photo shoots, tweets, and rallies galore, attempting to portray the image of a strong leader who defeated the virus that killed over 218,000 Americans. That's today's number. Critics call this behavior reckless and selfish, putting many support staff at risk. Supporters believe it shows Trump was right about the virus all along. Do you think Trump's contracting the virus and his subsequent behavior will have any effect on the election's outcome? Trump is behaving in, I'll just use the word wild, in a wild fashion. Mike, what do you think? Think it'll have an effect on how the election results come in?
Yeah, I think it'll have a minor effect in Joe Biden's favor. I think I've just heard enough, again, on the news where polls seem to be ticking a little more toward Biden. People are saying that they do not appreciate the president's reckless behavior. And other things that were pointed out is that, he got stellar gold star top line care that the other 330 some million people probably wouldn't get. And so my guess is a little bit of the resentment of some of the people seeing that might say, oh, heck with this, I'll either vote for Biden or vote for another candidate or not vote at all, but avoid a vote for Trump. But even that effect, I think it'll be minor. This base is set.
Michelle, leaning towards Biden, advantage Biden with this behavior of Trump?
I think it strengthens his core supporters that there's nothing that he could do that wouldn't support them. But I think that people who maybe were thinking about voting for him, but are kind of a little bit disgusted with him, will, I think, maybe go to Biden, because that was just pretty over the top. And especially as the numbers in all of these different places, especially in the swing states that he won, continue to climb. He is looking at it like he contracted this on purpose so that he could be the leader that showed, you could defeat this thing. But I think that thinking people are like, yeah. So.
Well, the hope is that there's more thinking people out there than non-thinkers. Thaddeus, advantage Biden with this behavior of Trump recently?
almost every time he opens his mouth, he seems to say something that advantages Biden. But at this late date, I kind of feel that such a large percentage of the voters on both sides are locked in their minds that there isn't a whole lot that he could do one way or the other that's going to change minds for him or against him.
Judy, locked in voters?
Yeah, I think it's a little too late to change many minds, but I thought when he got sick and then got well, that it would have a much bigger effect in his favor, and he's just blown it entirely. So it hasn't. I mean, people don't believe he's Superman or that the virus is not deadly just because he goes around exclaiming how wonderful he is. So yeah, I'd say advantage Biden.
The numbers are unbelievable. We have 37 states right now where the increases in the virus are showing up. So how about a quick assessment of the debates? Did you check any of the debates, Judy? You were smiling. What did you think about the debates?
Well, they're ridiculous. The presidential debate was ridiculous. I have to confess that I have trouble turning them on because I just don't want to listen to what Trump or Pence is going to say. And then I sort of make myself turn it on partway through and feel like I haven't missed anything. I think basically they're worthless, and Trump was completely ridiculous. But that's without watching all of it, I admit.
I didn't watch any of it for the same reason that you cited. I just couldn't stand the idea of watching that blowhard just keep going on and on. Michelle, did you watch the debates at all?
I did, with a drink in hand. And I think it actually, his behavior was so rude and so purposefully trying to incite Biden. I think, again, it cemented Biden's voters. The ones that I see are, so there's the trench, and there's Trump here that you're not going to convince, and the Biden here that you're not going to convince. And there's a few people that could fall in depending on what happens. I think he made them scooch over a little bit more on the Biden side.
Mike, did you watch the debates?
Oh, absolutely, we did. Watched them both. Yeah, I think Joe Biden did the best he could. It was sort of like being thrown to the lions. And he kept his cool. He talked to the people directly at the camera. And when he said, "Will you shut up, man?" I just busted. Trump was an embarrassment to the nation, and the entire world saw it. And I am just so disgusted with him for that. The vice presidential debates, a little more evenly handed. I appreciated that better. The thing that I just laughed at the most actually happened last night when Rachel Maddow was interviewing Kamala Harris, and the last question she asked, is sort of a half joke, was, "Did you see the fly?" And Kamala just paused for a second, just had a little smile like this, and and everybody, the studio, our living room, we just busted out laughing for like a whole minute. We couldn't even talk. It was so funny.
I think it was 2 minutes. It was recorded that the fly was on his head for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Thaddeus, there is not a debate tonight, though there was one scheduled for tonight, but Trump bailed out of it because he couldn't do it in person. And the reason he gave is because they could shut his mic off. And so he would not debate under those circumstances. However, NBC is having Trump give whatever Trump does for an hour. I guess it's kind of his, mini town hall rally. So what's your take on the debates in general?
Well, my take on the debates was debate number one was painful. It was like major surgery without Novocaine. Watching that fool make a fool of himself in front of the entire world. It angered me that he was so rude, not only to the other candidate, but to the monitor. You know, he just couldn't keep his mouth shut. And I agree that the reason that he wouldn't take a second debate on the night that we're recording this was that he would not be able to keep talking over his opponent and shout his opponent down because he'd be in a different location and his microphone would be shut off when he wasn't speaking. So the presidential debate that I saw was a good hour and a half wasted because.
So do you think there's going to be a third debate? Well, I shouldn't say third debate. There's 3 scheduled. Do you think there's going to be a final debate?
Who knows? If it is going to be under the same circumstances that they offered for the October 15th debate, possibly not, because you know, the president's ego just can't take that. So that remains to be seen. I actually think that more can be gained for the fans of the 2 candidates to do what they are doing as we are speaking, having separate town hall meetings.
Any concerns about the militia vigilante types showing up at the polls to intimidate voters? We talked a little bit about Trump encouraging them, to which you all agreed was just pure intimidation, encouraging people to show up at the polls to stop the cheating. Are you concerned that the vigilante militia types will show up?
Yes, but it's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern about vigilantes is that they will appear if the winner is announced to be Biden. And if
Appear where? Appear where?
In various cities and towns around the country, you know,
To do what?
To get revenge. You know, I'm talking about real, honest violence. There are the people who were trying to kidnap the governor were talking about, we want to start a civil war. And I think that the touch-off would be an announcement that Joe Biden has won the election. And that's what I'm most afraid about.
I understand, and I know a lot of people are, you know, have that fear, but you used the touch off. What do you think they would be doing? Would they just like randomly start firing bullets into people? Like, what people would they start shooting? Or I'm trying to understand how this violence will manifest.
I really don't know. I really don't.
Just worried about it.
This is just whatever people will do when they are enraged, and that might have no logic to it.
Judy, you have these kind of fears that is something?
Well, I think it's a possibility. I think your point of who are they going to shoot is a good one, actually. And I hadn't thought about that. But when they appear on the streets of, say, Portland or Kenosha, they're appearing in response to something that's going on that they don't like. There are already people on the street, so they're there to intimidate them. It'll be interesting to see how they would approach that if if there are no other people out on the streets. What do they do then? As far as whether they might show up at the polls, I think here I don't think it'll happen, but I don't think it's out of the question either.
Mike, do you have these fears about militia types showing up at the polls? Or what that is saying is that Biden wins?
Not as much. I don't think it's going to be like a big protest march or a protest like happened on January 21st, 2017. There might be isolated visits to polls by certain vigilante groups trying to intimidate, is my guess, but I think that would be, again, a small chance. I would be more concerned later that some people would try to create some kind of disturbance later.
Well, how do you see the disturbance unfolding? Thaddeus really didn't know, but he was still worried about it being touched off in some fashion. How do you see it?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's more like committing random acts of violence. It could be anything. It could be like starting a protest or intimidation. You know, it could be a violent protest in some town where the town is trashed. To a greater degree than some of the protests we've seen. It could mean even attempted assassination. I hate to say that. That's one thing that's been in the back of my mind is, oh my gosh, you know, what if somebody tries to assassinate the president, whoever it is, or some other official? So I think it'd be more in individualized random acts of violence like that that will shock the entire nation and, you know, upset all of us, but, you know, in other words, to do a little bit of violence that will create the largest type of disruption in the psyche of our country.
Michelle, who are
Well-
they going to shoot? Who are they going to? That's the thing that I'm not really putting my head around.
If there are revelers in the street, I could see drive-by incidents happening. You know, so for election night, as far as the election or as far as the polls go, I think it will be. I think there will be some. I think there will be even some in Alaska. Just sort of, they're going to push the envelope as far as the intimidation go. You're probably going to see trucks with the flags and the Trump flags and all of that stuff kind of circling, that kind of show of force or whatever.
Around the polls?
Around the polls, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then, you know, election night, I mean, depending on, you know, if it's a blowout and Biden totally, you know, gets every electoral vote, you know, from the East Coast to the Midwest, and people are out in the streets celebrating, then I think they're in danger if they do that.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of dumb to go out in the street on election night.
Right. But otherwise, I think it will be targeted, you know, possibly targeted individuals, you know, the whole cross-burning thing, which is, you know, I could see people, you know, lowering to that standard where they might go to somebody's house who is well-known, you know, and try to make some kind of a point to it. But I think it's going to be random acts of violence. And frankly, I think it will be cheered on by Trump, depending on how the numbers are starting to come in. And then whenever the final date of when they count the ballots, it's usually a week after, so that they can allow the votes to get to the polls to be counted, or for the absentee ballots. Then, you know, that's going to be where people are either going to be celebrating or they're going to be attacking people who are celebrating.
All right, I want to thank Michelle, Judy, Thad, Mike for joining us in this particular very important topic. And I want to tell the listeners out there that we're going to be talking on the next show about an analysis of the Trump supporter. We're going to analyze the personalities and the people who have supported Trump and try to figure out why. So until then, thanks for tuning in to the Cranky Curmudgeon Corner, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.